viewers, welcome to day 15th online classes. In last class, we completed about flow chart of human respiratory system and as well as the description of various parts of human respiratory system up to larynx we completed. In the part of that, we discussed in last class structure of larynx also. The larynx constructed with 9 cartilages and the function of the larynx and everything we got the idea. Followed? Right. We are going to discuss the subsequent parts of human respiratory system. In the continuation of larynx, the subsequent parts are trachea, then primary bronchi, then lungs. They are also called as pulmons. Let us see what's the organization, what is the function of each and every parts of this human respiratory system. Let's discuss about trachea. You observe this visual, the white color tube that represents the trachea. The trachea is nothing but the larynx leads into a tube, a narrow tube. Larynx leads into a tube, a long tube. So it is called trachea. It is a windpipe. Windpipe means remains as a open pipe, and the trachea lined by a specialized epithelium, that is pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. Remember, asked in entrance examination, trachea lined by pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. You observe this visual. There is pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. On the surface of the cells, prominent cilia are there, and in between the cells, at lower side, at bottom side, you observe specialized goblet cells are there. They secretes what? Mucus. So that keeps the wall of respiratory tract always as moist, that traps the dust particles, foreign particles, whatever present in our inhaled air. So that is about the function of epithelium. Next, the one more information, the tracheal wall also supported by C-shaped hyaline cartilage structures. You observe this visual. With the slide, it earmarked, and you observe this section, and blue color C-shaped hyaline cartilage made up of structures associated with wall of trachea. What is the function of these C-shaped cartilaginous rings? These cartilaginous rings provide support to trachea and keeps the trachea always as a windpipe and prevents the coiling, and as well as they prevents the collapse during inspiration. So all these are the functions that mediated by C-shaped cartilaginous rings. Follow students, right? Next, after trachea, you observe the trachea passes through the neck and enter into thoracic cavity up to mid part of our thoracic cavity, and it enter. So it leads into primary bronchi, the subsequent part of the thoracic. The subsequent part of trachea is primary bronchi. You observe this visual. This is primary bronchi. Right? Next, let's discuss about primary bronchi. You observe this is primary bronchi, where the trachea divides as two branches and enter into lungs. That part is considered as bronchi, otherwise primary bronchi. The trachea enter into thoracic cavity up to mid part of thoracic cavity, and there it bifurcates. Okay, it bifurcated at what region? At fifth thoracic vertebra. You remember it asked in entrance examination. At fifth thoracic vertebral region, it splits as two branches and gave rise primary bronchi. So the left and right side primary bronchi enter into corresponding lungs. So the left primary bronchi enter into left lung and right primary bronchi enter into right lung. Followed? Right. Next, all these bronchi, primary bronchi, supported by C-shaped cartilaginous rings like trachea. Right. Next, they enter into lungs. Now we will discuss about lungs. The lungs also called pulmons. You remember the further name, also called pulmons. You observe, these are our lungs. They are also called pulmons. One pair of lungs present in our body, they retained in thoracic chamber, in thoracic cavity, one on either side. These are soft, spongy, elastic bags. They are capable to stretch and as well as compress. So they are soft, spongy and elastic bags. Here you remember the properties, the features of every organ most important based on properties asked and questions in entrance examination. So you have to remember the properties of each and every organ. So here the human being lungs are soft, spongy and elastic bags. They are pinkish in color. You observe visual already. I exposed that. Right. Next, let us discuss the position of lungs in our body. If we observe position of lungs in our body, already I told situated in thoracic chamber. They seated in our thoracic cavity. So they occupied thoracic chamber. So they border with what structures? And such structures are forms anatomically airtight chamber. Followed. So the lungs seated in airtight chamber. Followed. So what is airtight chamber? Let's see. The airtight chamber formed by these structures. The first one, vertebral column toward dorsal side. So this is our ventral side and opposite side is dorsal side. So towards dorsal side, what is present? Vertebral column is present that borders the lungs. You observe, this is vertebral column, back side to our body. Right. Second part of airtight chamber, sternum at ventral side. You observe a flat bone is present at ventral side here. This is sternum. So it forms border at ventral side. And next, the third part, ribs at lateral sides. So the flat bones are extended from sternum towards the vertebral column. These bones are called ribs, and to these ribs forms a rib cage. So 12 pairs of ribs are present in our body, and such ribs are forms a rib cage in our thoracic cavity in which the lungs accommodate. Follow. So ribs forms the lateral side border in the airtight chamber, and after that one more structure associated with that is diaphragm, muscular diaphragm at lower side. You observe this visual, the muscular diaphragm is present. Alright, so that muscular diaphragm uh, remains at lower side in airtight chamber. So in airtight chamber, what are accommodated? One pair lungs to be accommodated. So the airtight chamber bordered by vertebral column towards dorsal side, sternum at ventral side, ribs at lateral side, and diaphragm at lower side. Okay, so this is airtight chamber and location of the lungs, position of the lungs in our thoracic cavity. And next, we will learn about external features of lungs, morphology of lungs, external features. If we observe morphology of lung, the left lung is slightly smaller than right lung. Followed? Right is important. Left lung is slightly smaller than right lung, and it is narrower and as well as lighter in weight, approximately 600 grams in weight. Remember, so narrower and light in weight comparatively with the right lung. And left lung has a groove, a fissure, so that is oblique fissure. You observe the left lung externally divided by a groove, deep groove, that is called fissure. The fissure named as oblique fissure. So the left lung has oblique fissure. That oblique fissure divides the left lung as two lobes. So the left lung contain externally two lobes. It has two lobes. So the lobes named as, one is superior lobe. You observe this visual. This is superior lobe, present upper side, hence it named as superior lobe. And next, second one is inferior lobe, present at bottom, lower side, and hence it is termed as inferior lobe. So the lobes of left lung are, one is superior lobe and another one is inferior lobe. Followed. So next, let's discuss about right lung. If we observe right lung, one more information, the left lung has a concavity. So that concavity called cardiac notch. You observe. The left lung has one more depression, concavity. That concavity called cardiac notch. Followed. So the cardiac notch function learn later. So next you observe the right lung. Right lung is comparatively larger than left lung, and the right lung is broader and heavy in weight, approximately 700 grams in weight, and the right lung has two fissures. Left lung contain only one fissure, but here right lung contain two fissures. You observe externally it contain two fissures. Follow. These two fissures are namely, number one, horizontal fissure. Why? Because it's seated horizontal fashion along the lung, across the lung, hence it termed as horizontal fissure. And next, another one, oblique fissure. You observe in visual, oblique fissure, it's seated as oblique fashion, hence termed as oblique fissure. So the fissures of right lung are horizontal fissure, oblique fissure. These two fissures divides the right lung as three lobes. Left lung divided as two lobes by mean of single fissure, but here the right lung divided as three lobes by mean of two fissure. Correct. That is the different. Right. Next, the lobes of right lung you observe. Superior lobe, superior lobe you observe, and second lobe is middle lobe you observe. This is middle lobe, and third one inferior lobe. So, right lung contain three lobes, namely superior lobe, middle lobe, inferior lobe. The difference is only middle lobe. Middle lobe is additional in right lung. Remember, the remaining two lobes are common. They are common to both left and right lungs. Followed. Right. With this, we completed lobes. Here you observe one more space present between left and right lung. The space you observe between left and right lung, space is there, gap is there. This space, this gap is called as mediastinum. So you observe this is mediastinum, very very important. The gap present between two lungs, the space present between two lungs called as mediastinum. What is the function of mediastinum? The mediastinum accommodates heart. Observe. This is heart. Mediastinum accommodates heart, and the left side portion of the heart completely fixed under cardiac notch of our left lung. Followed? Right. Next, besides heart, the mediastinum also accommodates esophagus and thymus gland that present on surface of the heart, pericardium, and lymphatic tract, major lymphatic tracts, thoracic tract. Followed? So also called chyliferous tract. All these are accommodated under mediastinum. So that is the function of mediastinum. So mediastinum accommodates what parts? Heart, esophagus, thymus, and lymphatic ducts of our lymphatic system. Right? Next, if we observe other features of lung, the lung externally enveloped by a bilayered sheath, bilayered membrane, two-layered membrane around the lungs, two-layered membrane is present. So that membrane is called pleura, otherwise pulmonary membrane, pleural membrane, pleurae, pulmonary membrane. Followed? So you observe this visual. Two layers are very clear around the lungs. The outer layer are marked with blue color layer, and inner layer are marked with the pink color layer. Followed? These are the pleura, also called pulmonary membrane. Right? You observe this visual. Two layers, outer and inner pulmonary membranes, pleura. So the outer pleura called as parietal pleura. All these are mesodermal in origin. Remember, outer membrane called parietal pleura, and next inner membrane visceral pleura. It origin from endoderm. So the outer layer is parietal pleura that arise from mesodermal layer, and inner membrane is visceral pleura arise from endodermal layer. So this is visceral pleura, inner layer. Followed, right? In between these two layers, we found a space, a gap, a narrow space exists between these two layers. The gap is called, the space is called pleural cavity. Followed? So, pleural cavity. That pleural cavity filled with a fluid, that is pleural fluid. Very very important. So the lungs enveloped by bilayered membrane. The membrane is called pleura. The outer layer is called parietal pleura, arise from mesoderm, and inner layer is called visceral layer, visceral pleura, arise from endoderm. Narrow space present between these two layers, that is called pleural cavity, and it filled with a fluid, that is pleural fluid. What is the use of that pleural fluid? It reduces the friction on the surface of the lungs and acts as a lubricant agent. Followed. So that is the function of the pleural fluid. Right. Next, internal structure of the lung. So morphology we completed. Let's discuss about histology of the lung. Internal structure of the lungs. So this diagram represents internal structure of the lung. In what way? What structures are appearing inside the lung, you observe? Internal structure of the lungs. So the primary bronchi, where trachea bifurcated and divides as two branches, they call primary bronchi. The primary bronchi enter into each lung, corresponding lung, and divides as many branches. Divides as many branches. These branches are sequentially or what? Let's see. Right. Yes. Internal structure of the lung. The primary bronchi going to divide as many branches. So these are sequentially. The first branch of primary bronchi, the primary bronchi divides as secondary bronchi. It is the first branch. So primary bronchi divides as secondary bronchi. Then it divides as tertiary bronchi. Followed. So third level branch it is. Right. Next, these tertiary bronchi, all these bronchi supported with C-shaped cartilages, and the tertiary bronchi again divides as minute, narrow, small branches. These branches are called bronchioles. So now the bronchi gave rise to bronchioles. The bronchioles are very narrow tubes. Then what? Bronchi. Bronchi, narrow tube. Then what? Trachea, like that. So gradually the lumen gradually decreases. Follow? Bronchioles are narrow tubes. Here, if we observe bronchioles, the initial bronchioles are called primary bronchioles. They again divide as secondary, tertiary bronchioles, like that. These are initial bronchioles. These initial bronchioles can supported with cartilage structures, but after crossing initial bronchioles, the remaining subsequent bronchioles doesn't supported with cartilage structures. Remember, initial bronchioles to be supported with C-shaped cartilage structures, but the other subsequent bronchioles does not supported with any cartilage structures. Follow? And these bronchioles divides as minute branches. They are sequentially, you observe, they enter into the lung lobule. The minute bronchiole, whatever present that enter into lung lobule, is called lobular bronchiole. Follow? After initial bronchiole, we found what? Lobular bronchiole that enter into lung lobule. Next, the lobular bronchiole again divides as terminal bronchioles, respiratory bronchioles, and alveolar duct. So the lobular bronchiole again gave rise terminal bronchiole, respiratory bronchiole and alveolar duct. These group of cluster of alveolar ducts terminates, they open into cluster of alveoli. So, if we observe all these tubular network, they form pulmonary tree in our lungs. What is pulmonary tree? The branching network of trachea, bronchi, bronchioles appears as upside down tree in the lungs. Inside our lung, the entire tubular network appear as a upside down tree. That is termed as pulmonary tree. You observe this visual. In this visual, if we rotated this visual upside down, so upright tree will get upright tree. So it arranged as a upside down tree in the lung. It is called pulmonary tree. You observe one more visual. Followed, right? Next, this is pulmonary tree. Right? The group of alveolar ducts opens into cluster of alveoli. They appear like a bunch of grapes. You observe this visual clearly. The cluster of alveoli there appear like a bunch of grapes. Cluster of alveoli. This is cluster of alveoli. The cluster of alveoli centrally has a wider cavity space that is called alveolar sac, otherwise atrium. Observe. So, the alveolar sac lined by squamous epithelium. This is alveolar sac, the central space. It is completely lined by squamous epithelium. About 300 alveoli present in each lung. They forms approximately 700 square meters surface area. Remember. So the alveoli are termed as miniatures of lung, structural and functional units of lung. Why they termed as structural and functional units? Let us see. The alveoli are, the wall of alveoli are vascularized. They are vascularized structures. You observe. The wall of alveoli supplied with the rich capillary network of pulmonary artery and pulmonary vein. Followed. That's why they able to, these alveoli contain capillary network of pulmonary artery and vein. So that facilitate what thing? That's why the alveoli are capable to mediates the exchange of respiratory gases. They capable to receive oxygen and capable to give off the CO2. So hence the alveoli commented as structural and functional units of lungs. Follow? So these are the very important. So alveoli are miniatures of lung, structural and functional units of lung. Next, if we observe the entire our respiratory tract, the tubular part is present, the tubular tract is present. So the tubular tract, the respiratory tract in our man differentiated as two parts. One is conducting part and second one is respiratory part. Two parts are there, conducting part and respiratory part. Respiratory part also termed as exchange part. So conducting part. What is conducting part? The conducting part extended from external nares at tip of the nose, one on either side, one pair holes are there. So such holes are called nostrils. Already we learned external nostrils. So these the conducting part extended from external nostril onward. So external nostril to up to terminal bronchiole, remember, up to terminal bronchiole. So many tubes involved in this path. So from external nostrils to up to terminal bronchiole, all these parts comes under category of conducting part. What is the function of conducting part? It transports the atmospheric air into alveoli of the lung and stops the dust particles that present in the air. Whatever foreign particles are present, it stops the foreign particles present in the air and humidifies the air. And as well as one more important function, it equalizes the temperature of inhaled air as equal to that of our body temperatures. So all these functions are mediated by conducting part. Followed. Right. Next, subsequent part, uh, respiratory part, exchange part. It also called respiratory part or exchange part. You observe this visual. It is exchange part. The respiratory part include respiratory bronchiole. After crossing terminal bronchiole, the subsequent tube is respiratory bronchiole. Branch is respiratory bronchiole. So the respiratory bronchiole, and after that alveolar duct, cluster of alveolar duct, and after that the cluster of alveoli, group of alveoli. So all these three togetherly consider as respiratory part or exchange part. Alright? So the respiratory tract differentiated as two parts. One is conducting part and the respiratory part. The conducting part extended from external nostrils to up to terminal bronchiole, and the respiratory part, the conducting part leads into respiratory part. The respiratory part starts with the respiratory bronchiole and ends with cluster of alveoli. Alright? Right. If we inhale air, the inhaled air ultimately enters into alveolar sac, alveoli. The last destination of air is alveoli. So these are the sites for diffusion. The oxygen and CO2, respiratory gases, to be exchanged under alveoli. Followed. So in next class we will discuss the mechanism of respiration. Thank you.